in Tasmania. Grew up in Launceston. Born in 1956. Finished the HSC, or matriculation as it was called then. Moved to Adelaide. Spent a couple of years at Flinders. I happened to be good enough to represent Tasmania in the Australian Championships in 1973 in Perth. So, I read, played squash, used to work at the Squash Centre in Launceston, used to take one of those little portable record players that you could buy and an armful of records when I was working at the Squash Centre and sit behind the counter listening to Rod Stewart and Brian Ferry. Two major music magazines in Australia in the late 70s, Duke in Melbourne, Ram in Sydney. Sydney because Anthony offered me a job. And I moved up here. The Angels road crew bought my worldly possessions in the back of their truck and deposited them with me in Sydney. I've never had what society deems to be a real job. And so I've always had to exist by my wits. And so that, that means doing lots of things. And that means, taking opportunities when they present themselves, doing weird things like I wrote twisted facts for twisties, $30 a fact. Hey, managed the Hoodoo Gurus initially for $15 when they approached me. $15 when you're earning 90 is a significant increase in your weekly income. Hoodoo Gurus budgets were done on the back of envelopes. $150,000 tours, as we did, budgets were done on the back of envelopes. Airfares approximately $3,000. Hotels 200 times how many people are in the band on the road. And it adds up to something. And then we go, okay, let's divide it by 50 and assume we get 50% houses. Then usually we get 30% houses, and we'd lose money. We were good at it. I count myself as one of the most fortunate human beings on the planet because I do stuff that I enjoy. I wake up in the morning and boy, poor old me, what am I going to do today? I'm going to listen to records. I'm going to read a bit, maybe. I'm going to talk to creative people. I'm going to laugh a lot. I'm going to wander around my fabulous home. It could be one hell of a lot worse. Kandinsky was probably the most difficult, and I'm really glad that I pursued him for almost 10 years. Before he finally gently capitulated and let me write an unauthorised biography. And so, sadly, he's no longer with us. Photo of him over there, photo of him down in the living room. No, the book I'm most proud of is Roadies, by a long shot. And it's also the biggest, most successful book I've ever done. I think because it did good. All of my books, I've realised as I've gone on, are documenting Australian popular culture, and getting down the stories of voices that will inevitably leave us. Roadies was important to me. People say, why'd you write a book on roadies? And the answer is simply that Adrian Anderson, one of the co-founders of the Australian Road Crew Association, was talking to me one day, and he told me that Australian road crew have 5 to 6 times the national suicide rate. And that I just went, what? It's a very sobering, scary statistic. And so I became fascinated by why that would be the case. And so I thought, God, I wouldn't, it'd be interesting just to tell the story of Australian road crew. So I interviewed about 80 roadies. One of the best years of my life, year and a half. I loved it. Didn't want to stop. Met some of the greatest human beings I've ever met, heard incredible stories, poignant stories, hysterical stories, and it came out at a time when, there was a lot of talk about mental health in the music industry. I am not for a moment saying that I instigated it, but it nicely coincided with magnificent organisations like Support Act appearing to broaden their financial assistance from musicians to encompass the road crew community. And it just seemed like it was at a time, and I'd like to think that I helped, artists started thanking their road crews. Some had done it before, but not many. And I was a manager like that. You just kind of assumed the road crew would do everything. And in hindsight, didn't spend, enough time thinking about their well-being and what you were asking them to do. So for them, it was a really important document. They could walk around as a book about, we're worth having a book about, and I learnt a lot too. It was the book was partly saying to people, if you think roadies are stupid guys in black who just cart heavy gear around, you've got no idea. And this older roadie, and I don't know his name, I wish I did. I didn't know him, but he obviously knew what I was there for. He just came up and stood next to me in the semi-darkness. He said, "Stuart, this is what we do." He said, "We build pyramids and then we take them down and we rebuild them somewhere else." And I went, wow, there's my book. I was getting towards the end, and Howard called up. Howard was fantastic. And Howard said, "How you going?" and I said, "Howard, I'm done. I'm done. I've done enough interviews. I've got to write this thing now." And he said, "Have you talked to Kerry Cunningham?" And I said, "No, I haven't talked to Kerry yet." He said, "You're not finished." And so Kerry's not well at the moment, but I remember it was Easter, and I went over to Kerry's place over at Leichhardt, and Kerry was just fantastic. And I walked out and I went, "Kerry fucking Cunningham." And the chapter in the book is Kerry fucking Cunningham. And I remember he came to this lunch, and he hadn't seen the book before, and I was wondering, I went, "Oh shit, I hope he doesn't mind." And of course he loved it. Basically, I equate it to someone who is given a jumper, who then unstitches every bit of that jumper and then knits it again. And that's what this editor did with my Paul Kelly book. And a phenomenal job of editing, which I was not capable. I was too close to it and I couldn't get it to work. With Patrick, with Shake Some Action, again, he was very hands-on. I remember Murray Engelhardt, whose book on Radio Birdman is great, which Patrick also edited, and he's edited other things for Murray. I remember Murray called me up when he heard that Patrick was editing Shake Some Action, and he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "I gave him a used car and he gave me back a Lamborghini," which was one nice line. And he said, "Stuart, I'm going to save you a lot of time." He said, "When Patrick suggests something on your manuscript, don't think about it, just say yes." And so I follow. And it's interesting with an editor. I mean, most days for quite a few months, I sort of wanted to strangle Patrick slowly. And because every page of my manuscript, there would be 8, 10, 12, 15 queries. Can you add to this? Is this really the way you remember it? Look, I know you're not trying to be pretentious, but this sounds a little bit pretentious. I had to remind myself every day that Patrick was actually working to make. He wasn't waking up every morning going, how can I torment Stuart? He was waking up every morning going, how can I make Stuart's book better? People say that the opening to my Michael Gudinski book, a lot of people have said it's the best writing that I've ever done. I don't know, but it's about the 24 hours in Michael's life in Perth after Mick Jagger's girlfriend had committed suicide in New York and the Rolling Stones were in Perth, and how Michael dealt with having $53 million on the line and the partner of the lead singer had committed suicide. And Matthew got me to rewrite that 12 times, I think. Every time he'd go, "Yep." Matthew's a very quiet man. He'd go, "You're getting there. Just give it another go." We had access to artists that I don't think people necessarily have these days. I don't think music journalists get flown overseas like I did on a regular basis to do 20 or 30 interviews. I'm not sure that someone would be sent to Paris to see Bruce Springsteen play, the equivalent of Bruce Springsteen as I was in 1981. I don't necessarily think that, you would get to go walking through King's Cross with Tom Waits like Andrew McMillan and I did with Tom, one evening in 1980 or 1981. I don't think you'd get flown to Paris to interview Mick Jagger. you know, all of that stuff, you know, and so, you know, some of, you know, and your best writing is when you get to do that. You know, you're gonna write a better piece when you're having breakfast with Iggy Pop after he's been to Lemmy from Motorhead's 50th birthday party than if it's a 15-minute Zoom. You know, because you can see Iggy shaking, you can see the cigarettes on the table, you can, you know, you're at the Chateau Marmont, you go off and then have lunch with Neil Diamond, you know, and you hang out with Neil Diamond. Of course, you're going to write a better piece because you know, you're given that time and that exposure to them. So, you know, the world where everything's done on Zoom and, you know, like people, you know, if I'm doing an interview and I ask for more than 15 minutes, people go, oh, why do you want that? And I go, well, because I can talk underwater. It takes me 15 minutes to say hello. You write differently about touring when you've been on overnight buses, sleeping with 12 people, walking out of a venue in San Diego and driving 12 hours to Albuquerque or wherever you're going to, and when you've, you know, been at shows and you've been backstage and you've fought with artists and they've screamed at you and you've screamed back at them, and you know, and you've done drugs with them and got drunk with them, and you know, I remember Brad Shepard and I careering through a casino in Las Vegas once in 1983 or 84 on that first tour with the Gurus. You know, when you know, Paul Kelly and I spent 6 weeks, just the two of us, driving around America because Mushroom Records thought it was a good idea. Craig Bloxham and I were exchanging emails the other day, working out, he reckons it's 43 years since we've seen each other, but we will see each other very soon because I'm working as the publicist for the Reggae Spies, which thrills me. And he put a post up I actually just saw recently, like an hour ago, thanking Roger Grierson and I for being behind Spy vs. Spy at the beginning. When we did we do 6 Fresh Lemons on Green Records? Yeah, Roger Grierson and I had Green Records in the early 1980s. Both of us knowing, oh, Roger knew a little bit about how to run a record label, sort of, because he'd had Doublethink. But I look back on those couple of years with, you know, I mean, we were living in a house together at 132 Cathedral Street in Woolloomooloo. The East Sydney Hotel was our second office. That's in fact where the Hoodoo Gurus signed their record deal, and we started this record label. We did that famous Beasts of Bourbon album. We did the first Do Re Mi recordings. We did Tactics, those early Tactics records. We did Spy vs. Spy. You know, we did the first New Christ single. You know, we released an incredible number of things, not realizing at the time, you know, the all-nighters, not realizing the significance that they would have. Like everything else, we were just two music fans with slight, you know, we overlapped, but I was more the punk rock, you know, Detroit Radio Birdman-y kind of guy. Roger was a little bit more into artier stuff and the ska things. He was managing the all-nighters, I was managing the Hoodoo Gurus. I always remember Sunday mornings, you know, having breakfast, comparing notes on how the Gurus had done the night before with how the all-nighters had done, you know, and where we'd been and all that sort of stuff. And so with Spies, no, we disliked them, you know. I mean, it was nothing more or less complicated than that, you know. We thought they were really good. We liked them all, the three of them, as people. And so, you know, I mean, I'd love to tell you there was some great plan, but we just put out records because we liked them. And we liked the Spies, and so we put them out. But I liked the fact that, you know, in my partial current guise as an independent artist publicist, what am I doing at the moment? I'm working on the Reggae Spies record with Craig, which is his reggae-ified reworkings of all the Spy vs. Spy songs. And I'm working with the All-Nighters on their final tour. So, you know, in both instances, it's over 4 decades since I had direct involvement, and it'll be over 40 years since I've seen most of the All-Nighters, and certainly since I've seen Craig. I just have a memory of they had fans like I have above me, big rotating ceiling fans at Benny's, and I remember the NXS guys standing on tables, grabbing on fans and swinging themselves around this bar. So yeah, I always got on well with them, but you know they were cocooned in excess world. That I will keep doing this, some variant of this, for as long as I'm able to. You know, I never thought I'd be a band manager. I never thought I'd be managing, you know, two of Australia's greatest artists at such pivotal times in their career. That was never part of the plan. You know, I never, when I walked into FBI in 2003 and was told that no one would be on air for more than 6 months, I never thought that 21 years later I'd still be on air. I stopped writing back in the 90s. I never thought that I would, you know, have written as many books as I have done, particularly over the last 10 years, with, as I said, 2 more to come. I don't know what, you know, lies in the future. You know, I might, you know, there's always something that's in discussion. You know, there's been a couple of television documentary things. You know, I never expected to be cropping up on Today Extra on Channel 9. You know, things just happen. I think the most important thing that keeps some of us going is continuing to embrace new music. There are too many of my comrades who, without naming names, you know, stopped listening to music in the 70s, 80s or 90s and stuff like that. And you know, nothing gets me on my soapbox faster than mate, there's no good music anymore. If I read one more person on social media, how come there's no good records anymore? You know, what's happened to music? It's just noise. And I go, no. You stop listening. You know, you made a decision to stop your youth in a particular era. And, you know, anyone who doesn't realise, you know, I actually believe there are as many good records being made now as there were in the 60s and 70s. You know, will they stand the test of time? We'll find that out in 30 or 40 years. You know, there's probably more great records being made now. And Eric, you know, I remember Nick Hornby a few years ago saying, and I agree with him totally, he said, you know, that for anyone with a passion for music, now is the best time in history to be alive. Getting to Sydney Swans, simply because there was a team in Sydney. I didn't grow up as a South Melbourne fan, of course, but it was a team. We could go, you know, in those days, I remember on the hill, it was just everyone had been at the Hopetoun Hotel the night before, and we'd troop out in various states of disarray to watch the footy. And I kept doing it. You know, I interviewed Warwick Capper for Dolly magazine. I'm in a Barry Hall commercial which is on YouTube, the Barry Hall. No, I mean, one of the greatest moments of my life was 1996 when we beat North Melbourne to go into the grand final, which we subsequently lost. But I remember I was with Martin Fabini from Regular Records in the stands, and I've never seen a rock concert where a crowd has erupted the way that they did when we made our way into that grand final. I describe Spotify as the devil's streaming service, but I kind of love it and hate it. I use it all the time, but I hate what it does for creative artists, and how it's eroded their income. So, you know, everything has changed, but you know, everything is always changing, and people adapt. You know, I mean, people go, oh, Spotify, it's killed the music industry, streaming. You know, I go, there's more good records coming out now than there has been, you know, ever. You know, so Spotify hasn't killed creativity, and it won't kill creativity. Nothing will kill creativity. Vinyl was dead. Here comes this shiny thing called the CD. And now, you know, I mean, golly, who saw vinyl coming back? Not me. It's still a great world to be alive in. You know, there's still phenomenal music, phenomenal books. And what a season the Swans are having.
It's okay.
Someone said to me when Shake Some Action came out, someone wrote to me and they said, oh, God, they made 2 points. They said, God, you moved house a lot, and God, you took a lot of drugs. And I said 2 things. If you were alive in the 70s and 80s, you moved house all the time. That was just part of what you did, because you didn't have enough money unless your parents were rich to own a house, and you moved at the whim of landlords. And so, yes, you did move all of the time. Everybody moved all the time. And I wrote back to this guy and I said, yeah, I didn't know anyone who didn't take drugs. And again, it's not condoning drugs, and we all took different drugs. I've never tried heroin, thank goodness, because I'd probably love it. But we all took drugs. That's what we did. We were young, we were kids, comparatively, and some of us stopped at varying times. Some of us didn't. People say, "Oh, so and so's got to stop taking drugs. So and so's got to stop drinking." And one thing I know is that no amount of people telling someone to stop taking drugs or to stop drinking is going to make the slightest iota of a difference until that individual decides they want to stop taking drugs and they want to stop drinking.
First concert you went to?
Seekers.
The first album you remember owning that was important to you?
Probably the first album. I had some compilations. Would it be the Who Live at Leeds? Maybe Who Live at Leeds? It might have been a Jimi Hendrix record. Probably might have been Harvest by Neil Young. All around 70, 71, 72. Songs of Love and Hate by Leonard Cohen. But I'm trying to think. Yeah, there was two compilations that I had, but on the spot, Who Live at Leeds.
If you had a magic wand and you could see any band or artist, past or present, tonight, who would it be?
Elvis Presley, Aretha Franklin. Are 2 people I haven't seen. Probably Elvis. I would have loved to, because I've written a book about Elvis in the 70s. I would have liked to have seen Elvis. Would have liked to have seen Elvis in Vegas.
Beatles or Stones?
Growing up, Stones, without question.
Hendrix or Clapton?
At the time, Hendrix.
Hagar or Lee Roth?
Struggle to get enthusiastic about either.
That's an answer. Frida or Agnetha?
Ditto. But I love ABBA. ABBA was a group.
Dance floor or seated?
Or these days, I'm very much seated. I get anxiety in big crowds. Have done for a very long time, and I'm almost 68. Yeah, I want to sit.
Fender or Gibson?
Don't know, but I'll say Fender only because I was in Tokyo recently, and by accident we found ourselves at the Fender shop, and it was an incredible shop with some amazing guitars, but I don't really have a feeling one way or the other. But Fender gets the nod because they came into my life very recently, and it was a really hot day in Tokyo, and they gave me a pick-shaped fan.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone. I'm a Mac person, always have been.
All
There's
right.
Mac, and then there's some other stuff.
Your favourite beverage?
Well, sparkling mineral water or coffee.
MTV or Rage?
I don't watch and hardly ever watched either, but Rage, because of its frequent sense of Australian and world music history and keeping a whole lot of those things alive.
Vinyl or streaming?
I don't listen to a format. I listen to music. If I had to pick, I'd pick vinyl. But I really get very tired of it's all better on vinyl. It's not always better on vinyl. And streaming is very convenient. CDs are fantastic. I'm a Grateful Dead nerd. I don't want to listen to Grateful Dead on vinyl and turn over a Grateful Dead every 20 minutes. I want a CD for jazz. I prefer listening to a lot of it on CD. But to go back to my point, I listen to music, not a format.
Stairway to Heaven or Bohemian Rhapsody?
By a nudge, Stairway to Heaven, because I never got Queen.
It's 1 a.m. You've seen a band. You've had a good time. Almost time to head off. What's your kebab order?
Oh, I don't know. It's a long time since I've had a kebab, but I always have after shows. If you're gonna have a kebab, it's with a lot, including garlic sauce.
Where do you see yourself in 5.5 years?
Well, hopefully still breathing, but assuming that nothing that one hopes doesn't happen, I'll probably be sitting kind of right where I'm sitting now, listening to records and reading books and writing books. I've got a couple of books to finish. I don't. I don't. I'm lucky. I'm alive and healthy, pretty healthy. At almost 68. I just hope it continues. Yeah. Susan, my partner, and I are finishing off working with Peter Noble, who owns Blues Fest, on his memoir. And I'm writing a book, which I've got to pull my finger out, and that wall of books down there is all research, and all of this is research. I'm writing a book on organised crime and the Australian entertainment industry from 1955 to the present day for Hachette, which will be out. It's not going to be out next year. It'll be out in 2026. Hi, I'm Stuart Coupe, and you can find my story at the Australian Rock and Roll Museum.